And it says in verse 4, these are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the whole earth. Now, if you turn to the book of Zechariah in the Old Testament, chapter 4, we find there's a prophecy of this in Zechariah chapter 4 as well. In Zechariah chapter 4, we read that he saw a vision of a lampstand and 2 olive trees on either side. Zechariah 4:11. He said, what are these 2 olive trees? And he was answered and told in verse 14, these are the 2 anointed ones who are standing by the Lord of the whole earth. Now that's what we see here in Revelation 11:4, the 2 olive trees, the 2 lampstands, that is 2 witnesses whom the Lord is going to have on earth. I believe there are going to be 2 men who are going to stand before the Lord of the earth, 2 prophets in the last days who will prophesy, particularly in Jerusalem. And if anyone desires to harm them, notice the description, Revelation 11:5, of these 2 prophets. Just by the way, I want you to know, I don't know whether any of you have seen the official symbol of the nation of Israel today. They've got an official symbol. You know what it is? It's a lampstand and fig leaves on either side. Very interesting. A lampstand in the middle and fig leaves on either side. That's just in passing. Things are moving in the direction that we see in the Scriptures. And Revelation 11:5 it says, if anyone desires to harm these 2 prophets, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. I understand that to mean that the fire would be the Word of God, that through their spoken word, their enemies will be destroyed. Now there are 2 people in the Old Testament whom we read of who destroyed their enemies like this, with the spoken word. One you read in Numbers and chapter 16, that is Moses, when he denounced Korah and his friends. Numbers 16:35, it says, fire came from the Lord and destroyed those enemies of Moses. And the other is in 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 10, where when the king of Samaria, Ahaziah, sent soldiers to capture Elijah, Elijah said, if I am a man of God, let fire come down and consume all your 50 soldiers. And fire came down and consumed his enemies. So we find these 2 witnesses are going to prophesy in the spirit of Moses and Elijah. Fiery men, uncompromising, fiery prophets. If anyone desires to harm them, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. Now, how do we know that these people are not going to be Christian prophets? Because we read in Luke chapter 9 something very interesting, that when Jesus came to Samaria, remember, Samaria was the place where Elijah called down fire to consume his enemies. Now, Jesus came to the same Samaria many years later, and the Samaritans did not receive him. We read in Luke chapter 9, verse 52 and 53. They did not receive him. And James and John, the good Bible scholars, verse 54, they knew all about the Old Testament. They knew what Elijah did. They said, Lord, shall we call down fire from heaven to consume them, in the margin, as Elijah did? And the Lord said, you don't know, verse 55, what kind of spirit you are. For the Son of Man has not come to call fire from heaven. He has not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. There is a difference between the New Covenant and the Old Covenant. We don't call down fire from heaven to consume our enemies. No. We follow in the footsteps of Jesus, who said, Father, forgive them. And of Stephen, who said, Lord, lay not the sin to their charge. But that period of grace is over. It's the time of judgment that's come now, what we read of in Revelation 11, We saw that in our last study, that Jesus has opened the scroll fully. In the synagogue in Nazareth, He didn't open it fully. He said, the acceptable year of the Lord. That is these 2,000 years. And there was a last sentence that He left out there, the day of vengeance of our God. But that's also open now. And so, now these prophets are proclaiming judgment. And therefore, we see that the age of grace is virtually over. And fire proceeds out of their mouth, Revelation 11:5, and devours their enemies. And if anyone would desire to harm them in this manner, he must be killed. Another thing, verse 6, these have the power to shut up the sky in order that rain may not fall during the days of their prophesying. Who did that in the Old Testament? Elijah. And do you know for how long he did it? We read in James 5 verse 17 that when Elijah prayed, it did not rain on the earth for 42 months, for 1,260 days. It's exactly the same period. Here is someone who is going to prophesy and stand in the spirit of Moses and Elijah. And it says here, they have power, Revelation 11:6, over the waters to turn them into blood. Who did that in the Old Testament? Moses. And to smite the earth with every plague. Who did that? Moses. As often as they desire. So, putting these two verses together, it seems pretty clear that these are two people who are going to be in the spirit of Moses and Elijah. And in the book of Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament, we read in Malachi chapter 4 and verse 5, verse 4 and 5, do you know who are the last two prophets mentioned in the Old Testament? Malachi chapter 4, verses 4 and 5, Moses and Elijah. Remember the law of Moses my servant, even the statutes and ordinances which I commanded him in Horeb. Behold, I am going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. So we find confirmation in the last book of the Old Testament that before the great and terrible day of the Lord, Elijah is going to come. And remember the law of Moses. His law stands for him. And there's going to be some type of witness there. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, and I don't want to try and speculate what it'll be, but there's going to be some type of witness that God's going to have of two men who prophesy in Jerusalem in the spirit of Moses and Elijah. Now, I want you to notice something that Moses and Elijah both stood for in the Old Testament. Do you remember the time when Moses came down from the mountain and the whole nation of Israel had gone astray, worshipping idols? They were clapping and singing and dancing and also committing adultery. Like a lot of people today who clap and sing and dance and commit adultery. Just the same. Apostasy, drifting away from God. And Moses came down and he stood in the gate of the camp. And you know what he said? Who is on the Lord's side? Come over to me. That's the spirit of Moses. Elijah, we read, was living in a time when the entire nation went out to worship idols. One day he gathered the nation on the top of Mount Carmel, and he said almost exactly what Moses said. How long are you going to sit on the fence? If the Lord is God, follow Him. If Baal, the idol, is your God, follow him. You see, these are the two witnesses that are going to be there for those 42 months. Now, the reason I mention that is because there's something of that we need to see in relation to the last days of the church as well. Because I believe with all my heart that though we don't call down fire from heaven or shut the heavens or call down plagues on the earth, we are to stand in the spirit of Moses and Elijah in this sense, in the church in these last days before Jesus returns, to ask this question, who is on the Lord's side? Let him come out to me. That's very clear. Moses didn't go into the midst of those dead denominations to try and change them. He came out of them and said, you come out and stand with me if you're on the Lord's side. The same thing Elijah. He stood out alone from all those dead denominations and he said, who is your God? The Word of God or the traditions of men? Don't sit on the fence between the Word of God and the traditions of men. Decide which you're going to follow. The same spirit that we need to see in the church in the last days. And we read that Elijah ministered under the reign of the most wicked king and queen that Israel ever had. That was a man called Ahab. And there's one word written about Ahab in 1 Kings 21, verse 25. Have you heard of people who sell themselves to Satan in order to have power? There are people even in our day who do that. Well, it says about Ahab in 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 25, that he sold himself to do evil. He sold himself to the devil. And therefore he is a type of the Antichrist. And who then is Jezebel a type of? That's clear. The bride of the Antichrist, that is Babylon. The false church. The harlot system. Which we considered that in Revelation 2. You have a prophetess there called Jezebel. And Elijah, in the Old Testament, prophesied in that situation to God's people. And that's how it's going to be in the last days, with the rise of the Antichrist and the rise of the false harlot church. There's going to be the ministry of Elijah in the church immediately before it's raptured. And there's going to be the ministry of Elijah in Jerusalem in the reign of the Antichrist. Moses also was a picture, in the Old Testament, Pharaoh is a picture of the Antichrist, and Moses stood there against Pharaoh. So we see a similarity between their ministries in the Old Testament and the ministries of these men in Revelation chapter 11.